the number one thing that you need to have is a second passport. You need another passport from another country that isn't Australia. And, to be quite honest, isn't New Zealand, Canada, the UK, the US, somewhere in the EU. Okay, you need a passport that is not from the Anglosphere at all. There are plenty of countries where you can get them very easily. You don't have to live there for years and that sort of stuff. Yeah, I would characterize the English-speaking world and Western Europe as kind of the spoiled brats of the world. We're like the kids that grew up, we're the trust fund babies of the world, where we're inheriting all this money, all this wealth, all this infrastructure, and a lot of arrogance from our ancestors because of what they've built. And there's a lot to be proud of in terms of what they've built. But it's translated into this real kind of superiority complex. And there's a trap that we fall into where we think, well, I wouldn't want to live anywhere outside of the Anglosphere. Oh, goodness, no. I couldn't possibly be happy living in Mexico. I couldn't possibly be happy living in the Czech Republic. Oh, heavens no. Well, actually, you probably could. You probably could live very, very well. And in fact, it'd be a lot cheaper. And you'd probably discover that there's a whole lot of petty rules that don't exist over there, and the sense of freedom and the feeling of liberation is quite significant if you pick the right place to go. So when I talk about going somewhere, I'm not talking about going somewhere else in the Anglosphere, because quite frankly, they're all basket cases as well. And if Australia reaches the point that you're trying to get out of Australia, I don't think the UK or Canada or New Zealand, the US especially, or even most of Western Europe, thinking Germany, France, etc., are going to be the places where you actually want to be going. If you're getting out of Australia, it's for a reason. And I think the whole Anglosphere is all headed in the same direction. So if you're leaving, assume that you're not leaving for there. So when I talk about this idea of leaving Australia, most people say where? And the assumption that's contained in that one word question, where, is that you're going to take your entire life as it exists in Australia and you're going to transplant it to a single other country, and you're going to plant your entire life in this other country. And that's not in any way what I am working on and planning to do for my family. I should mention there's a chap by the name of Andrew Henderson. He calls himself the Nomad Capitalist, nomadcapitalist.com, I think. I highly recommend, if this is of interest to you, if you're listening to this going, okay, maybe, spend some time on his website. He puts up an enormous amount of content, videos, literally every single day. You've probably got to watch 50 of his videos and read 20 of his blog articles. But as you do that, all the pieces will start to fit into place. Obviously, each video only covers one little tiny thing. But as you listen and as you read, you start to get all the pieces and put them into place, and it starts to make a lot of sense. And he's very generous with his content, and he does give you a lot of good information. He's a young guy, a little bit younger than me. I was a bit put off with him early on because he came across as a bit arrogant, but to be honest, that's probably because I was kind of looking at myself a little bit too. So put that aside, forgive him for that. He does know his stuff, and I would really recommend spending a bit of time on the nomadcapitalist.com. Wrapping your head around this. He introduces this idea of a flag planting theory. And essentially what you're doing is you're breaking up your life into different modules, and you're planting those modules in different countries. So for example, you might go to, and I'm spitballing here, you might go to a Caribbean country, let's say St. Lucia, and participate in their citizenship by investment program. Now, this is where I said that option 3, the option to get out of Australia, it is more expensive. It takes up more resources. You've got to count the opportunity cost. Citizenship by investment programs aren't free. They require an investment. That investment usually starts at about $100,000 US. All right. So this is not like we're talking some coin here. But even if that's not an option for you, hear me out and understand the theory behind this. So you get a passport from that country. It doesn't mean you live in St. Lucia. With a St. Lucian passport, you can get residence in lots of other places in the world. And you might go, right, I want to live in that country or this country, or you might want to live in Singapore. You might want to live in wherever it may be. And it doesn't have to be St. Lucia. It can be Vanuatu. It can be Dominica. It can be, there's a lot. It can be Andorra. There's a lot of different countries in different parts of the world that offer this type of idea. You come along, you invest in some form or other. And after a bunch of paperwork, and usually anywhere from 3 months to 12 months, you get their passport. And it's legit. It's a genuine passport. You have, that passport is as real as any other passport. That it's as real as your Australian passport, right? You got to pick carefully. Some places require you to visit every year or spend a certain amount of time there and so forth, but there's other places that don't. So again, spending time on nomadcapitalist.com is going to help you. And there's no, just in case anyone's wondering, there's no affiliation. He doesn't know that I exist. There's no quid pro quo here. I'm mentioning him because I found him to be an incredibly valuable resource as I've researched. I've been reading and listening to his stuff for about 4 years now. So where you live, so you need a second passport. But that doesn't have to be where you live. You then, with that second passport, you can get residency in another place. But then, that place may not be where you want to be investing. So you might, for example, want to invest in Cambodia. Believe it or not, you might want to be looking at investing in Rwanda. Believe it or not, if you'd had your money in there over the last 10 years, you would have done very, very well. I know people that have lived in places like Vietnam or lived in Central America or lived in lots of other places, invested in markets that you or I look at and go, why would I want to put my money there? I want to keep my money safe in Australia. Is your money really safe in Australia? The growth rates that we see, I mean, they look like they're very high. I would argue they're not if you factor in the true inflation, which I think is much higher than the official inflation. But you've got economies around the world that are emerging out of sort of third world status into second world status, a booming middle class. Their rates of growth are off the charts. The returns that you can get on investments in some of these places are insane. You can have money in the bank in those places and be earning 6 and 7% interest in some cases. And some of them have very good international banks. You can have money. There are a few places where you could have money in US dollars, if you really wanted to, in these places earning 3 and 4% interest on US dollars. So there's no currency risk there if you're happy to be denominated in US dollars. But as in, you're not holding on to ringgit or baht or any of those. There is a whole world out there. And this has been an amazing journey for me over the last 4 years as I have sort of gotten over my Australia-centric. I mean, I was born here. I was raised here. I joined the Army Reserves. I was quite willing to spend the rest of my life here. And it's only been in the last couple of years that I've even begun to think that maybe I don't want to live here, or I'd always sort of thought maybe I'd live in another country for a while, but I'd come back here. And that has begun to really shift for me. And especially that Venezuela experience, and then this last year and a bit in Victoria, just going, if this is where my country is going, if this is who we're becoming, then for the first time ever, I'm starting to think, you know what, maybe there will come a point in time where I leave and I don't come back. I'm not saying there will, but I'm open to it now. And I wasn't certainly 6-7 years ago. No, why would I leave permanently? I wouldn't want to leave permanently. Well, now I'm thinking maybe I do. Or maybe I will reach the point where I do. I'm not there yet. So flag planting theory. So you might have a company that's incorporated in one particular jurisdiction because it has a really good corporate law and really favorable tax conditions on corporations. But then that pays money into a trust that's in another jurisdiction because it has the right kind of laws for that. And that company is investing money into another jurisdiction because that's where the growth is and that's where you want to be getting onto some of these markets that are growing really quickly. But then you're living in another country altogether and holding a passport of another country again. 5 different flags. And this is not groundbreaking. There are people that have been doing this for decades and decades. The rich of this world, I assure you, do not have a single passport. And they do not have all of their assets held in one country and all of their entities incorporated in one country. They are diversified. There's a thing called sovereign risk, which multinationals are always looking at. The sovereign risk. If we're going to invest in, let's say, a new mine, we're going to put $100 billion into a new mine in some part of Africa. They're looking at the sovereign risk. What is the risk that country is going to start expropriating private property or is going to have a revolution and fall apart or what have you? And there are 2 ways you can deal with risk. You can put all your eggs into the safest basket that you can find, or you spread your eggs. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. And when people sort of ask me that question, where will you go? They're assuming that I'm going to pick up all of my eggs out of Australia and put all of my eggs into one other basket. And that's simply not the case. There is a whole world out there, and the world is actually a very friendly place. If you could get out of Australia right now, you'd be able to travel through a huge number of countries. Yeah, okay, maybe not every country in the Anglosphere, But there are what are there, 200 and something countries in the world, and an enormous number of them will welcome you with open arms. And you can come on in, you can stay, you can set up companies, you can start businesses. They would love to have you. We just never think about it because we've grown up unknowingly. We've grown up in this sort of frat boy trust fund baby Anglosphere that thinks we're so much better than everybody else. And in many ways we are, but I think the trajectory is not looking great, and the trajectory of other countries is looking quite good. So I'm not going to go into any more sort of detail on option 3 in terms of getting out of Australia than that. But I would, if this piques your interest, if you're sitting here going, that actually, I want to know more about that. The best thing for you to do is go to the source that I've gotten most of my information from. There's no good me just regurgitating Andrew Henderson's content. So nomadcapitalist.com, and it is a bit of a grind. There's no sort of easy, simple pathway through his stuff. I would probably start by Googling 5 Flags Theory, and he's got a blog post all about 5 Flags Theory, and he talks about this idea of spreading your risk and spreading your entities across different jurisdictions. One of the most exciting things that I think is going to happen, I talked at the very outset of this, I talked about the fact I'm actually really optimistic about the future, and I know this whole kind of thing has been about doom and gloom and being ready for things to go wrong. I think that's an important thing to have because it can give you confidence that you can go into the future without, you're not at huge risk if something's about to go wrong. You've actually got you've got options, which is what this whole thing's about. But actually, I really am genuinely massively optimistic about the future. And one of the things that has me more excited, probably more excited than technology, and technology is going to be incredible in the next 40, 50 years, but we are entering a new era of innovation in governance, in government. And to steal a phrase from Andrew Henderson, he refers to the Anglosphere, what I'm calling the frat boys, the trust fund babies. He refers to us as the legacy brands. We're the old established brands when it comes to countries. And if you think of a country, and this is me, this is not Andrew Henderson, this is me, I've started to think of countries not as these special entities and governments, as these special sort of unique entities. Think of them as a shopping center management company, right? And your life is like a shop inside a shopping center. And if you were going to start up a shop, you would be looking at all the different shopping centers and going, okay, how much are they going to charge me to be there? What do they provide in return? What are the opportunities there? How much foot traffic is there? How much money am I going to make? How much money am I going to have to pay? You'd be assessing them, from those perspectives. And I think there's a really good reason to do that. I mean, you think about what living in Australia is costing you. There's the taxes, which is for a median Australian income earner, more than 50% of your purchasing power disappears in taxes at all levels and fees and charges from your government. I did a video on this a number of years ago called The Forbidden History of Terrible Taxes. More than 50% of the median Australian salary earner is actually going on the cost of government. Your government, that management company that's managing the shopping center, is the most expensive thing that you will ever buy in your life. People think it's their house. It's not. It's your government. That is, you spend more money on your government than you do on any other thing. Now, with that in mind, maybe we should be shopping around for some better value. Maybe we should be wondering and asking ourselves whether there's another shopping center somewhere, another management company that we could be positioning ourselves under, or diversifying out and saying, I'll put this part of my life under that management company and this part of my life under that management company, and I will personally live under that management company over there, and selecting them on the basis of what actually suits you best. I've been talking about libertarianism for many, many years, and there's a joke with libertarianism. If you ask 2 libertarians to define what libertarianism is, you'll get 3 different answers, and that's sadly true. There is no accepted definition of what a libertarian is. I call myself a libertarian, but there's plenty of libertarians who would disagree. But when you talk about small government, when you talk about principles of good governmental management or not good governmental management, less government interference, which to me is the same thing, but not having all the rules and regulations, not having all the red tape, not having all the taxes. A common retort from idiots is, go and move to Somalia then. If you really want to have no government, go and move to Somalia. And I guess in a way, I've kind of come around to the point where I'm kind of like, yeah, okay. I'm not necessarily going to choose Somalia. I'm going to choose whatever suits me best for whatever reasons are important to me. But maybe I don't actually have to maybe I don't actually have to be sitting here putting up with all of this. I am going to try and change it. I do love Australia. I think it's a brilliant place, and I would like to live here, and come back here, even if I do live elsewhere for a while. I'd love to come back here, retire here, die here, have my see my grandkids grow up here. It's got a lot going for it, but not if it's going to become Venezuela. Not if it's going to take that road, and we don't know yet how far down this road we're going to go. We don't have the benefit of hindsight because we're living it in real time. So this is about the option. This is about having that option. Firstly, the option to stay put in the event that something unexpected goes wrong. Secondly, the option to get somewhere where things are better within Australia, presumably driving, in the event that your staying put reaches the end of its usefulness. But I would argue, given where the country's headed, it's been years of research for me, and I'm now at the point where I'm beginning to actually take concrete action and actually put in place some of these things and starting to spend a little bit of that money. I don't have the money for a citizenship by investment program, but there's things that I'm putting in place and working towards to get that option 3 in place. Not that I have any intention of moving out of Australia, but I have no intention of being that grandfather that I spoke to, who failed to put in place the option, failed to give himself and his kids and his grandkids that option, and has had to live ever since with the consequences of that. I see there's been a bunch of comments here, so I'm just going to quickly scroll through a few. Someone's dropped in the links to the Nomad Capitalist. Thank you for doing that. Yeah, so Michael Angelico is pointing out that, everywhere else in the Anglosphere is doing pretty much the same thing. And some of them are further along than us already. So if you're leaving Australia, it's a pretty safe bet that the Anglosphere is not where you're moving to. You're not going to the UK. Look at what they're doing when it comes to freedom of speech, when it comes to religious liberty, all that sort of stuff. Look at Canada. They're arresting pastors, and all the same stuff we're seeing in the UK and we're seeing in Victoria are all happening over there. I don't want to move to Germany. I don't want to move to Spain. I don't want to move to France. The Anglosphere, Western Europe, and the English-speaking world, for me is pretty much out. If I'm leaving Australia, it's not to go there. It's because all of these places are following this same path. Paul Garrett says we need to band together as we the people. 100%. And as I've said, I'm not abandoning ship. I'm not getting out of the country. I'm putting in place options, and I might not need that option for 30 years. I hope I never need that option. I hope that I get to the end of my life and go, oh well, that was money wasted. Like I said, option 1 and 2 you can put in place without really much cost. There's not a lot of opportunity cost to having the option to stay put and the option to get somewhere better within Australia. Putting in place the second passport, residencies, offshore entities, this sort of stuff, that's expensive. It's expensive to set up and it's expensive to maintain. So you don't want to be jumping into that boots and all sort of naively or without the resources to keep what you put in place. There's some significant opportunity costs there. But for me, as I look ahead and as I think about my own experiences and I think about what I saw in Venezuela and the people that I talked to, for me, that's a cost that I'm personally willing to work towards and ultimately pay and ultimately bear. That doesn't mean you have to agree, but that's for me where I'm headed. Alex has said common law. Thoughts? Common law is a bit like the US Bill of Rights. It's great in theory, but try actually using it in practice. The common law says that we have all kinds of rights that in practice we don't have. The US Bill of Rights says that they have all kinds of rights and protections and freedoms that in practice they don't have. The problem with law, no matter what it is, whether it's common law, whether it's a Bill of Rights, whether it's constitutional law, or whether it's legislation, is that it's just words on a page. And in the end, if it's no longer being honoured, if it's no longer being abided by, then it has absolutely no power left. I have lost a lot of faith in the judicial system over the last 15 months. I had, perhaps naively, faith that once you got to the Victorian Supreme Court or got to the Australian High Court, that you would expect to find pretty good, just outcomes. And maybe that was naive of me, but there's been a lot that's happened in the last 15 months and a lot that's happened in Victoria with the judicial whitewashing of what Daniel Andrews has done, no interest in the violations of human rights. What does it mean if it's written on a page, if the people that have the power or have taken the power are just going to ignore it? It doesn't really mean a whole lot. So common law should be incredibly valuable and should be our biggest asset in this fight. But unfortunately, in practice, it may as well not be there. We may as well not have it. in practice. Ian says, managing risk is not about fear, it's about careful threat and opportunity assessment. A baseline of preparation is such an empowering achievement. 100%. And this for me, once you've actually got a few things in place, you can kind of put some of that worry out of your mind a little bit. You don't have to be thinking, well, what would I do if? Well, you already know what your options are. You already know that you've got some wiggle room. You're going to have a bit of time up your sleeve, and it can actually give you quite a lot of peace of mind and quite a sense of empowerment. And I should add on option 3, if you're a business person or if you're someone who at the very least you can earn your income online, so you might be a consultant or you might be doing sort of virtual C-suite stuff, virtual chief financial officer, virtual chief technology officer, whatever it may be, and a bunch of other. There are lots of different professions that can earn their money online, graphic designers and so forth. If you're one of those, then potentially you can go and live in another country, and instead of paying whatever it is for you, $25,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year in taxes, you're keeping most of that. Maybe not all of it. Maybe you still end up wearing 10% tax or 5% tax. But all of a sudden, there's another $40,000 in your pocket, and you're living somewhere where the cost of living is lower. So there's another probably $20,000 in your pocket. And so that 100 grand that you were earning, or let's dial that back a bit. Let's say you were earning 75 grand, or you were earning 70 grand. The government used to cost you 35 grand. Now it's costing you 6 or 7 grand. The cost of living's gone down as well. All of a sudden, you could easily find yourself with 30 grand a year that you didn't have before, that you didn't know you had, because the cost of government was so high, and so much of it's hidden. It's not just the income tax and the GST. There's so much of the cost of government that is hidden. You add that up over a few years, and all of a sudden you've got yourself a nest egg. All this sort of, what are we going to do for retirement? We need retirement funds. We need to increase the old age pension. Blah blah blah. That doesn't have to apply to you. It only really applies to us because we can't get ahead because the cost of government is just so high. And if I come back to my analogy about management companies, if you're sitting here going, the shopping center that is managing where I'm currently set up, where I've got my shop set up, my life set up, is costing me a fortune, and the services that they're providing are not worth the cost that they're charging me, then maybe having a look around at a different place to get set up. Potentially, as much as I'm sort of saying option 3, yeah, there's opportunity cost, there's money that goes out. If you're the right kind of person and you're involved in earning your money in the right kind of way, potentially it could actually be a net gain. You could make all that money back and then more besides over time. Obviously, this is not financial advice. I'm just speculating. Ivan says, mate, more than 120 direct and indirect taxes, the third most taxed country on earth, yet your government will not let you buy or sell unless you vax and take on their ID 2020 agenda. Yeah, look, we haven't seen the full rollout of mandatory vaccinations yet, and obviously they're not going to say that that's what they want to do, but it's very, very clear. We already have, to a degree, mandatory vaccinations for specific industries. If you're working in childcare and working in aged care or these sorts of things, there are certain vaccinations you have to have. It's not a conspiracy theory. You just have to listen to what Scott Morrison is saying, and he wants to make the coronavirus vaccine mandatory for aged care workers. And depending on where in the world you look, you can see countries that are trying to make these vaccinations mandatory for being allowed to go to a sporting event or having certain kinds of jobs and this sort of stuff. So it's... I'm not ready to jump on the they're going to make it all mandatory bandwagon necessarily, but the reality is we already have that to a degree, and I don't see that going away. They are going to continue, and this won't be the last one either. There's going to be another virus. There's going to be another thing. Hey, everyone needs to get vaccinated with this one. It's not going to go away. Paul Garrett says, let's fight for what we had as kids, or what we thought we had. Yes, Paul, and that's what I've been doing. I've been doing it for 12 years now, and it's what I'm going to continue to do. And to be honest, even if I left and went overseas, I would probably still be engaged and involved in the fight back here. We have the internet now. I can still be engaged and involved in that fight and trying my best in what little way I can to make some kind of a difference. But that doesn't mean that we have to sit here and suffer the consequences if that fight ends up being lost. That, I guess, is more my point. Heidi, actually, thank you for asking that question, because you've reminded me that I never actually filled in this option 3. Heidi asks, but does having another citizenship mean we can leave Australia? I'm a dual national and I can't leave without an exemption from the government. Heidi, you're absolutely right. You have to leave a country on the same passport you entered on. And when you enter your country of citizenship, you have to enter on their passport. So anyone that's in Australia and has an Australian passport, when you try and leave, you have to leave on your Australian passport, and that means you have to beg for their permission. You're absolutely right, Heidi. But this is about the right to leave and the right to arrive somewhere else. So, for example, let's just say I had a St. Lucian passport, and that's not the one I'm working towards, by the way. I know that it is a citizenship by investment program, so that's why I'm naming that one. And a travel bubble opened up between Australia and New Zealand. I fly from Australia to New Zealand on the Australian passport, and then when in New Zealand, I pull out the St. Lucian passport, and I fly over to St. Lucia, where they have to let me in because I'm a citizen. I have their passport, and then I sit there and tool around St. Lucia for as long as I jolly well feel like, or use their passport, or the Australian passport, to be quite honest, to then get visas into other countries that are welcoming people and letting people in. And if you have that location-independent income, if you have a way of earning money that doesn't require you to be in Australia. Obviously, if you're a farmer, if you're a tradie, if you have medical qualifications or things that don't necessarily travel to other countries, this can be a lot more complicated. But if you're someone who can earn online, and all you need is a good internet connection to be able to continue earning money, then yeah, you use the Australian passport to go to wherever that is outside of Australia that doesn't have exit restrictions, and then you pull out the other passport and you go wherever the hell you want. Will they give you a hard time when you go to come back to Australia? Who knows? In the short term, probably. But if you decided 3 years down the track, finally all this is blown over and you want to come back home and see your grandkids or visit people or whatever it may be, shut down everything here so that you can leave for good, whatever the reason for return might be, in 3 years, coming back in on your Australian passport, I don't know, probably not a drama though. And even if you relinquish your Australian passport, you can still get a visa to visit. Australia gives tourist visas to most passports. So you come back, you relinquish your Australian citizenship. Worst case scenario. I'm not saying you should or that I want to, but I'm just talking worst case scenario. You get out, you go and live your best life. You have great fun for 3 years. Now you want to come back here and see people, but you've relinquished your Australian passport for whatever reason. You get a tourist visa. You come back in here for a couple of months, you see your friends, all that sort of stuff, and then you tell them what a great life you're having outside of Australia, and they start to come and visit you wherever you've got yourself set up. Hopefully you've got friends that can do that. Right. So Heidi, you're absolutely right. To finish off that question, you have to leave on the Australian passport. That has a restriction on it. But it would be a lot easier if you then had a second passport, because what your options are once you get out of Australia itself, you've got a lot more options than what you've got if you're just holding an Australian passport. Michael says, I suggest that leaving is not the option many consider it to be in the event of a monetary reset. The country you're moving to may be materially better. That's far from guaranteed in the environment of a monetary reset. Okay, it's quite a long comment. Yeah, okay. So in essence, Michael, my response would be, if you are leaving in that sense, if you are, you probably want to do it earlier. You probably don't want to wait until we've gone full Venezuela. You're probably going to be wanting to do it before then. If there is a monetary reset, things are going to get tricky no matter where you are. But there's an interesting assumption that you've got built into your comment there. The country you're moving to must be materially better. I disagree. I would be looking for a place where the pace of life is slower and they are independent when it comes to their food supply and their own energy production. That for me, I mean, if I can go to a place where the pace of life is a little bit slower than what it is here, the government is less intrusive than what it is here, which you'll find is the case in a lot of smaller countries. The smaller a country is, as a general rule, not universal, but as a general rule, the more they're just going to leave you alone and get on with business and get on with life. And it's a place like, I wouldn't go to Singapore, for example. They're completely dependent on imports of basically everything to get by. If there is any kind of a global disruption, you're pretty screwed if you're in Singapore. But there are lots of parts of the world that you can go where they supply pretty much all their own food and they have their own independent electricity grid. And I think you can live reasonably well when you want to, or when you're willing to. Are you going to have all the comforts of home? Probably not. You're going to have that cafe on the corner that does the best baked, Spanish baked eggs? No, probably not. You're going to have to adapt and accept certain things. But we're talking about a situation where you're choosing to get out of Australia. We're not talking about a situation where Australia is as good as it is now. You're not going to get out if it's as good as it is now. We're talking about a situation where things have continued on and deteriorated in Australia. Libertarian life is not corporatist life, says Ivan. Okay. And Paul Garrett says it ain't blowing over. Well, history would tend to agree with you, Ivan. So history says that once governments get power, once governments introduce a program or a restriction, it never goes away. History shows us that very, very clearly. So I think you're probably right. It's not blowing over. And the powers that the Victorian government has given itself and the powers that the Australian government has taken for itself now to lock Australians out of Australia and to lock Australians into Australia. These are powers that they will continue to reserve. They may not always be exercising them, but they will continue to have them and they will continue to reserve them. And it won't take very much of an incident for them to reactivate them. So I tend to agree. And it's one of the reasons why I want to have the opportunity to just kind of disconnect from the Anglosphere altogether if I decide that the situation actually warrants that, which I don't think it does yet. But again, this is about having options. And this is the third option, the highest level of option, the last one you should be thinking about, only once you've actually got the others in place. But I think it's an option worth having. Sorry, let me rephrase that. I think it's an option worth thinking about and either getting or dismissing as not applicable to you or not something that you would want to have. Okay, last comment before I wrap this up, because I realise we've been going for quite a long time. Ian says they've just brought in the vaccine certificate, different name and connotation, same use as a passport. Absolutely. But keep in mind, Israel brought that in, and then they did dump the program just recently. Once they've basically said COVID is over from their perspective. They're no longer trying to control it. Vaccination levels have reached a high enough level, and immunity from having acquired and recovered from COVID combined with vaccinations has reached a high enough level. They're no longer trying to control or police it. It's just another flu now as far as they're concerned. And they did remove all of the vaccine passport restrictions that they had brought in. Now, I think they should never have brought them in, but they did, and now they have actually wound them back and gotten rid of them. So there is an example, contrary to what I just said, of a government program being wound back. So let me sum it up. Life is uncertain. Yay. We've had it really good. We've had it so good for so long. And it would be naive to think that it's going to continue that way. And I think that in the case of sort of that level 1 preparation, the level 2 preparation, the option to stay where you are for, let's say, 30 days without needing anything from the outside is a really powerful and liberating thing to have. And it's not expensive. It doesn't cost you a lot in opportunity cost. Do it the sensible economic way to be able to survive at a minimum level. And it doesn't have to cost you very much. The option to then be able to get to somewhere where things are hopefully better, which is, to me, basically means somewhere where food is grown and population density is lower, to be welcomed there and to be able to have something, skills, things, whatever it may be, that they actually want and need under those circumstances, I think it potentially puts you in a situation where whatever happens and whatever goes wrong, you have an indefinite survival horizon. There is no, for most people, their survival horizon is 2 days. If the taps stopped working and everyone ran down to the supermarkets and cleared the shelves of bottled water and everything else, and all the logistics stopped, their survival horizon is, well, they wouldn't be dead in 2 days, but they'd be out of water in 2 days. And they would, in 5 days, there'd be a lot of people in really, really serious trouble. With having that option 1 to stay put and the option 2 to then be able to get to where you want to be, you have an indefinite survival horizon. And that, I think, is a pretty powerful place to be, given that life is uncertain. I'm not saying any of this stuff is going to happen, but life is uncertain, and I don't think it hurts to have that. That level 3 option to get out of Australia, that's probably my political side speaking, and my experiences in Venezuela, without question, are definitely influencing that. And you may disagree. You may see it very, very differently, and that's fine. That's you, I'm me. That's what this is all about. But I would encourage anyone that is sitting there going, interesting, spend some time on nomadecapitalist.com. Invest time every day over the next couple of weeks watching a few more of his videos, reading a few more of his blogs. Just eat up all the content. He puts it out there for free, and in amongst it there, he really does tell you a lot. You really can learn a lot just by doing that, without paying him a cent, without having to do anything other than invest some of your time and figure out if that really is something that you think might be interesting. Keep in mind that we are heading towards a world where there is going to be more competition at the governance level. There are more jurisdictions trying to create special economic zones or trying to compete on improved taxation as legacy brands, as Andrew Henderson would put it, or as I would put it, the trust fund baby countries start to further curb liberties and further restrict people, there will be smaller jurisdictions around the world that see the opportunity to attract people by offering them the freedoms that they can no longer get in their own home. Competition amongst governance, competition amongst governments is something that is going to be a big feature, I think, of the entire rest of this century, the next 80 years. I think we're going to, and it's already started, but I think it's just going to continue getting more and more competitive in the governance space, even as the legacy brands are trying to get together and introduce a global minimum tax rate and so forth. There's a whole bunch of other countries licking their lips and saying, fantastic, if they do that, there's going to be heaps of people wanting to come here and spend their money and invest their money and live here. There will be competition in the governance space, just as there is competition in everything else. And that option 3 gives you the opportunity, should you choose to participate in that market, the market for governance. And that, for me, is one of the most exciting things that's emerging at the moment. And I think it's just going to get more and more interesting as time goes by. So I'm going to wind it up. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've at least found it thought-provoking. I've covered a reasonable amount of ground, and a lot of you have stuck with me, so I'm very, very grateful for that. And so hopefully that means that you've found it thought-provoking. Whether you choose to do anything is entirely up to you, but I think that these are things, they're not sexy things to talk about. They're not, I'm not going to get 1 million subscribers talking about this stuff, but I think they're important things to talk about. And I don't really hear many other people talking about it, so that's why I've kind of decided to get a bit deeper into this space and to talk about this stuff a little bit more. Again, in the context of being incredibly optimistic about the future. The future is going to be a really cool place, but there's going to be some speed humps along the way. So without further ado, thank you very much for watching. Thank you so much for all the comments, all the likes and all that sort of stuff. It's been a really interesting conversation. I've appreciated the questions as well. And at some point in time, I will probably feel the urge to do another slow chat, and I will obviously post it to the page when that happens. But in the interim, all the best. Stay safe, stay warm, because crikey, it's cold out there in Melbourne at the moment. And I will see you next time. Cheers. Bye.